Cave diving. It's not just a sport for seeing wet rocks. It's a unique global subculture, a culture full of history, innovation, conservation, and exploration. The tales of cave diving have often been conveyed through the tragic stories of dives gone wrong, but in this series, I would like to shift your focus to the real legends, the pioneers of New Frontier, the distinctive locations that underwater caves are found, and the history of their exploration and uncovering the mysteries of what is yet to be discovered. Each cave is unique and tells its own story. Join me as I dive into the past and look towards the future of underwater cave exploration at Madison Blue Springs. Madison Blue Springs State Park is known for its beautiful basin of blue water and opportunities for public outdoor recreation. The park is located 12 miles upstream from the confluence of the Withlacoochee and Suwannee River. The property is managed by the Florida Division of Recreations and Parks. Madison is one of 33 first magnitude springs in Florida, meaning it's a spring that discharges 64 million gallons of water per day or more. That water from Madison contributes nearly a quarter of flow to the Withlacoochee River from its spring run. The aquifer that feeds the spring is an internationally known cave diving destination. Over 26,000 feet of underground passages have been explored at Madison Blue by certified cave divers, with continued exploration in progress. Madison Blue Spring State Park is a significant geological site, boasting numerous karst features such as aquatic caves, spring vents, and sinkholes. The aquatic cave system that extends beyond park boundaries is home to several species of invertebrates, like the Florida cave amphipod and the pallid cave crayfish. What was once a freshwater source for local inhabitants predating colonization has now become one of Florida's most popular state parks. It's a resource that must be preserved through continued study, exploration, and conservation.
In 1986's Underwater Speleology magazine, it was said that in 1981, Sheck Exley and Wes Skiles helped map the Madison Blue Springs system. Wes later reported a smaller passage to Court Smith, who then traversed it to find the famous courtyard section of Madison Blue. From this experience, Wes was quoted for saying, "The seemingly insignificant may yield a major find." Some of the original explorers of Madison, along with Sheck Exley and Wes Skiles, were the late Frank Martz, Court Smith, and Louis Holzendorf. These are only a few of the many cave divers who have contributed to the discovery in Madison Cave System. Most information that comes from early exploration history in Madison Blue is in the form of news articles in diving magazines, survey notes and passed down logbooks, and storytelling. Stories that are passed on by the people who were there and doing it during the golden age of cave exploration. People like veteran cave diver, explorer, photographer, and book author Guy Bryant. In 1982, Guy Bryant and Roger Werner found a passage off of the Crossunder Tunnel that connected to a different entrance called Ransom Sink. I was privileged with the opportunity to interview and dive with Guy Bryant at Madison Blue Cave, where he showed me the Crossunder Tunnel that he and Werner dove into discovery.
First started diving Madison in 1972. I made my first dive in Madison with Court Smith. We had been doing a lot of dry caving. He said, "You ought to try cave diving." Okay, let's go for it. And we went all the way back to the half hitch, my first dive, second dive ever, more or less. And that hooked me on cave diving for sure, and I was ready to become a cave diver. It was with Court Smith most of the time, and then Buddy Sanders entered the picture. And so I was diving a lot with Court and Buddy initially for the first 5 or 6 years here in Madison. The early years, I didn't really pay much attention to that, but there were a lot of divers that I knew about, like Frank Martz, Mike McCaskill. Frank Martz, his early days, he discovered Mark's sink. And then McCaskill discovered another sink over from Martz, which at the time they did not link it to the cave system. But later on, Roger Werner managed to link it. Others, Court Smith naturally and Louis Holzendorf, did a lot of stuff in here. They discovered what was then we called the new section, and that was the area with the banana room, monkey room, and Godzilla room, all that circuit. Even the Century Tunnel in that area of the new section is what Louis Holzendorf and Court discovered. Other divers that got involved, John Zumrick and Bob Goodman, they pushed a little tunnel off the side of the main line called the Zumgood Tunnel. It's a pretty little tunnel, but it doesn't go far. Jim Lockwood, I believe, did some work here in the early days, but I don't recall exactly what he might have done. Naturally, Sheck and Wes Skiles were in here diving one time, and they pushed the Mount Offshoot Tunnel all the way up to the Rocky Horror almost, right at the Otter's Delight. Court told David Nolan about it, and so they went and checked it out, and of course David Nolan says, oh, well, let's go, because he wouldn't. Court mainly took David because David was known for trying to squeeze through anything. And so David starts with the reel and goes through the Potter's Delight, and they get into the Rocky Horror. And every time David would go a little way, he was like, I wonder if Court's sure about this. And he would turn around and look at Court, and Court had his knife out and was going like that. And David, go, go. And so they went all the way through and discovered the courtyard area. And for those interested, the tunnel to the right, once you get into the courtyard, is called David's Fork, and that's because of David Nolan. Back in those days, all you had to do was go up to a place and dive. No permits were required, no permissions, unless it was private property. But usually the owners didn't care. You just dived. There was no worry about liability or anything like that. We just went and dove. And a lot of the private owners were like, oh yeah, see if I got a cave down there. And so we'd have a lot of fun checking that out. So that's more or less the way we did it back then. Another way that we found springs, you would be diving a spring or something and locals would be around. And they would say, have you ever dived so-and-so? And we'd like, no, I never heard of it. Naturally, they'd give you directions or even take you there. And that opened up a lot of places as well. We're using the same equipment, just better technology with equipment. Back in the early days, we had everything was homemade just about. Ford initially made dual manifolds to go on doubles. He even came up with a triple combination at one time. I wore 3 72s on my back and did a long dive at Peacock. Homemade scooters even. We made homemade BCs, homemade lights. But now you can buy all this stuff that's standardized. You can buy it pre-manufactured. It's better technology, better batteries. We don't have the big battery canisters on our side, but now you've got a little old battery, lithium-ion battery, that'll last you 4 hours. Yeah, the technology's improved, but the techniques are basically the same. This dates back around 1982. Court Smith and I were just making a leisurely dive in Madison, and we were just going off the horseshoe room and just looking at all the little side tunnels and just checking them out. Some went, some didn't. And those that went only went 100 feet, if that much. And then we go down into the Crossunder Tunnel, and the Crossunder Tunnel forks. There's a left fork and a right fork. Well, the left fork is for years had been filled in with sand. The right fork went a little ways and it ended at a restriction. And I looked at that restriction, and I stuck my head through it, and I could see it looked like it opened up on the other side, so I started pulling rocks out. Well, I said, well, this is going to take a while. So we exited, and so I came back on solo dives, 2 solo dives after that, to clean out the rocks. I kept pulling rocks, and I was just using a single 80 with a Y valve on it. And so I didn't have a lot of time underwater, maybe 30 minutes of work, and then I would have used a third of my air, so I would surface. I come back another day, did the same thing. And then Lee Sams and I was telling him about it, and he said, well, let's go check it out. I said, I think we can fit through now. So we took our 80s on our back with a Y valve, and then we took a stage bottle. And I got to the restriction, and there was a line in it. I said, dang, someone here scooped me. And so we started following the line. And the time from my last dig was a few weeks until this point. So it gave somebody time to go. So I follow this line, and it goes all the way to the aqueduct. And I see it's 110 feet drop down to 110 feet. And I'm seeing an upstream and a downstream line. I said, my God, what have I missed? And so when I get back home, I call Sheck and I say, Sheck, did you go and do this? Sheck says, no, it wasn't me. And so then a couple of days later, I get a call from Roger Warner. He says, I was talking to Shaq, telling him what I had done at Blue Springs, and he said I should call you, that I scooped you. I said, okay, yeah. So Roger then said, well, why don't you help me with some more? There's plenty more to do there. I want to try to see if I connect the upstream section, which is known now as the Badlands, with the courtyard. He says, I think it's going to do it. I said, sure, I'll help you, Roger. I said, thank you for letting me come along. So we made several dives, and finally, one dive that we were making, it was a triple stage, and we got back to the third stage, and I blew an O-ring in my stage bottle. So I said, well, I'm going to have to turn and go back. So I waved goodbye to Roger. He kept going, and on that dive, wouldn't you know it, he made the connection. And I didn't make it. But that's more or less the story. And another story about after Roger and I had done all that work, Larry Royal and Bob McGuire and I started pushing the aqueduct downstream. And we did multiple stages with scooters. And back then we used Techno scooters. And a Techno scooter was small enough to easily get through the Crossunder Tunnel. And we had pushed it out to 7,000 feet from the entrance. And so we stopped there because that was getting to be a lot of deco. And I don't like deco. But anyway, it's been pushed even further now by KUR. Access has changed dramatically over the years. Initially, a paper company owned this spring, and it was wide open to anyone. You could come at night, you could camp, whatever you wanted to do. So most of our dives back then were at night because we were working and or going to school. And so after school or after work, we'd come dive, especially since this is only a 30-minute drive from Valdosta. Easy to dive. Later on, the paper company decided to sell the property, and Anna Bruick bought it, and her son Mike Bruick. And they turned it into a more or less a pay-for-dive place. Still though, because I knew Mike, we could dive at any time we wanted, basically. So that didn't change for me too much, but for other people it did. They had to pay. I got lucky, he would let me in without paying. Then the state bought it. And when the state bought it, that put an end to night diving, put an end to camping here. Then all of a sudden you had to be certified. Initially, you didn't have to be certified to dive anywhere. You could just dive. Even a lot of the state parks now, like Peacock Springs, it wasn't a state park back then. You just go and dive. Back in the 80s, Lee Sams and I went up there one time. We didn't have to show any kind of certification. They let us in. They just wanted to make sure we had the right equipment. So we showed them our cave diving gear. Said, well, it looks like you're ready. So we dived. I mean, no problem.
Yeah, come on in.
Yeah. So here, things are definitely different now since the state has taken it over. The cave itself looks a lot more worn than it did in the early days. Especially when you're going into the Godzilla circuit from the banana room into the monkey room. There's a restriction you go through. At that time, it was a total silt out. So one person would go through and pop into the monkey room and wait. You would have to wait a little while, and then it would clear enough for the next person to go through. And now there's no silt there at all. It's all rock. So that has naturally changed things, as well as the Rocky Horror. Initially, the Rocky Horror was really tight if you had on 104s on your back. It took a little maneuvering to get through. Now, if I go through it with 104s, it's had so much traffic that I can just swim right on through. So it's not like it used to be at all.
Not quite as horrifying.
Yes,
Yeah.
quite not. Okay, as far as diver traffic goes, it has changed over the years. Initially, back in the 70s, it was rare to see anybody here, even the early 80s. But as the 90s appeared, it started getting to be really popular. People were diving here a lot. Sometimes I would come to dive, and there would be 3 or 4 teams on the water. But here lately, in the last 10 or so years, traffic has seemed to really have dropped off. People are interested in diving elsewhere. And I don't really see too many other divers here anymore. There's still plenty here that can be explored. It's like a maze of tunnels. But right now, if you want to explore at Madison, you're going to have to go way back, thousands of feet. It's going to be harder to continue the exploration, but there's still plenty of tunnels that remain unexplored, but they're in the further reaches of the cave, both up and downstream. It's only people like the KUR group are currently exploring and trying to do a totally new map of the system as we speak. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that.
So where can viewers learn more about your experiences in cave diving Madison Blue?
There's, for example, let's see, I wrote a little blog, some of the early cave diving I did, new explorations and stuff, or places I assisted with. And you can find that just by Googling my name. Just Google Guy Bryant Cave Diving, and you'll see it pop up. Also, I have a YouTube channel where I do videos of caves. And if you want to see what the inside of a cave looks like that you haven't been to, that would be a good idea to look at some of those videos. Also, I wrote a book. In this book, which you can find on Amazon, and also the Dive Outpost Dive Shop and Cave Country Dive Shop have some copies for sale as well. In the book, I more or less detail my early years, how I became a cave diver, the history surrounding that area, some of the equipment we used, our homemade equipment. It's more or less about how I learned to cave dive and the people involved in that time, and the lessons I learned along the way. Back in those days, there really wasn't a need for certification. So, for example, my first cave dive was in 1972. I didn't get certified until 1992 because I had no need for it. But once the state started buying up all the springs and making state parks out of them, then you had to show a certification. So I said, well, I'll go ahead and get certified. So I did. But yeah, you can check those out for more information. Definitely get certified, because then you're going to learn the basics. But once you're certified, that doesn't mean you can just go and do any cave dive you want. You need to build experience. Back when I was learning to dive, we had mentorship, and I would highly recommend the mentorship approach. For example, Karst Smith and I, we would just go into Madison here, and we would practice. We would go 1,000 feet back, turn our lights off, and share air coming out all the way in total darkness. So practicing things like that with a mentor is very helpful. Don't just assume because, oh, I have a certification now, that you can do anything you want as a cave diver. No, you've got to build up experience.
Seeing the Crossunder Tunnel with Guy was an amazing experience. Diving into the history of exploration at Madison Blue was exhilarating. I feel I have a deeper appreciation for the system because of it, but as I swim through the dark passages, I'm left to wonder, where does it end? Though over 5 miles of cave passage has been surveyed, exploration and scientific diving operations continue. Karst Underwater Research divers have been diving Madison Blue Springs to extend exploration beyond the courtyard since 2022. The team has completed surveys of numerous other small tunnels and marked leads for future exploration. The Karst Underwater Research team will continue to explore, map, and photograph at Madison in support of preserving Florida Springs and expanding its state park reach. Over 3,000 feet of passage has been surveyed, and the end of the line has been extended 2,000 feet, with no end in sight. The current KUR Madison Blue team consists of several members, including Matt Hansen and Eli Romine. I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with them about their ongoing exploration and survey efforts in Madison Blue.
Karst Underwater Research is a 501c3 nonprofit organization devoted to understanding the aquifer and the springs and your drinking water and what we can do to help conserve those resources and keep everything healthy. The way that we do that mostly is we work with the state and private landowners to map the underwater cave systems at all of the different springs. And a lot of these cave systems go for miles and miles underground, and there's really no other way to know what's under our feet other than to go there and measure it.
We met back in 2021 when I moved down from Virginia. He had already been down here for a number of years, but I moved down from Virginia and we started working on the Karst Underwater projects back in 2022. Most recently, pushing towards the back this past year, so 2023.
Madison's been being explored for a very long time, since the early days of cave diving. At one point it was privately owned, the state bought it. Some of the old timers actually had scootered Madison before most of the cave was even found. and then once the state owned it, you couldn't scooter Madison anymore. But there have been hundreds of people that have explored in Madison. I have a pretty good list of them on the map, but
Really too many to list.
Yeah. It's too many to list, so it's in very tiny print. Yeah. And I'm sure people are missing, but I've done my best.
As part of the survey project, we're finding tunnels that have never been surveyed and that have original line in them from God knows how long ago, from the 80s or 90s. There's so much that so many people have done. It's hard to have a true understanding of what all was very early on, other than finding the courtyard with Court Smith. I work pretty closely with Lamar Hires, and he's told me all the stories of his exploration with Court and all that stuff. He always talks about how he knew about the courtyard lead when Court went and found it, and he was so pissed off that Court was the one that found the courtyard. The biggest obstacle was once Matt started pushing further into the graveyard, is what we call it. The depths back there exceed 140 feet, and you're 9,000 feet back from home. Yeah. So the dives get increasingly longer, with every push. That was the biggest obstacle, was the dives were getting really long, and it's dangerous to decompress when you're cold. The easiest thing for us to do was to put in a habitat right there in the cavern for us to, be warm and eat and drink and talk about the dive while we're decompressing for, 3 to 4 hours.
About an 8-hour dive. It takes us almost 2 hours to get out to the end of where we're exploring, and then we have 20 minutes or so to poke around and try to find something new. Almost 2 hours to get back to the cavern, and then 4 hours of decompression.
Another logistical nightmare with Madison in particular is you got to go through Rocky Horror, and we have safety bottles staged throughout the cave. Rocky Horror is a small section, so you can only carry so much at one time. So yeah, we had to do a lot of setup dives, and we're going to have to do more setup dives because it's been a little bit since we've been to the back again. So we got to go pull all of our old stuff in multiple dives and then do it all again to put new ones in.
It takes weeks of work and hundreds of dollars per diver.
It usually gives us like a season where we can do stuff, right? So it's like once we set the cave up, we're good for a long time. A lot of the bottles that are in there at the moment have been in there for 2-3 years at this point, and that's where they're pushing it to the point where we need to pull them out and replace them.
Yeah, to put that in perspective, we've got 6 bottles that live in the cave past Rocky Horror, and if we're doing a setup dive to replace one of those bottles or put a new one in, we can maybe each carry 1 extra bottle through Rocky Horror, and so we can put in 2 bottles, and then we need those working bottles to be able to put in bottles farther in, so that's coming back the next weekend and doing it again.
And they all contain helium. Those dives, they get so long that, and also below 120 feet on working dives, you want a little bit of helium just for the gas density.
To get to these kind of distances in Madison, you really can't swim. You need to use a scooter, which is not allowed for normal divers at the state park. We have a permit with the state where we're allowed to use DPVs in order to go to these far places and do the work that we're doing for them, and in exchange we bring that data back to the state. For one of our dives, we've each got a rebreather and bailout and a scooter and all of the safety bottles we already mentioned. We usually bring a tow scooter as well, at least one for the team, sometimes 2. And then we have the habitat that we've installed in the cavern, and we need to bring gas for that to push the water out of it, and also oxygen so that when we're sitting in there we can make up the oxygen. And we have a special habitat rebreather basically that turns the entire habitat into a giant rebreather.
Yeah, well, like the difference between ours and theirs is they're consistently pumping fresh gas into that at Blue Grotto, whereas ours, it's been stale since our last time we were in there.
Right. People swim under it, and of course they're breathing, and so all of their bubbles go up into that. So it's going to be higher CO2, and the bottom of it's open to the water, so it's possible that the oxygen is dissolved out of the gas into the water, and it's almost pure nitrogen in there. You don't really know. It's been potentially weeks or months when you're sticking your head up there since somebody flushed it with good gas.
Karst Underwater Research with our support team, it ranges from any people that are on the permit and people that are off the permit that come by and sit on the surface, and we feed them well with stuff that we just throw in a cooler for them to, because all they got to do is help us move some tanks down the water to start our dive, and the state requires us to have surface support during any of our permit dives, so they have to stay there for their duration of the dive or swap out with other people. But we have people that also are on the permit that can help us in water by bringing us, our decompression bottles, taking stuff to the habitat like our food and heater batteries and stuff like that. As for sponsorships, there's Dive Right and Scuba Force and a number of others.
A lot of it's also just self-funded by the people that want to go, buying bottles off of Facebook Marketplace. Anything that we can beg, borrow, or steal gets put in the cave. If you look at the safety bottles, they don't have new gear on them. They have everybody's leftover stuff because it's going in the cave to get destroyed over time.
Yeah, it's usually when someone upgrades their gear, it's be like, oh, I have this old regulator. We'll put it in the cave and it'll die a noble death in the cave.
Finding the graveyard was a big moment. In May 2022, I wanted to go out to the end of the line and see what was out there. Madison's always been one of my favorite caves. So I went out there with myself, Joey McNamara, and Charlie Roberson. Common knowledge, at least on the team, was that there was nothing really left to find out there. Madison was kind of done as a cave. Out there, there's Sheck Exley's old line, and where he ended it, the cave kind of gets real small, and it's a body-sized tube that you could fight into, but it's kind of clearly not going to be the way to go. Sometime after Sheck laid that line, Doug Chappell came along, and he put in a couple 100 feet of line. It started just a little bit before Sheck's end of line, and he found a way up to the top of this giant hill of breakdown that was just covered in silt, very soft and kind of unstable. I went up there, and Joey and Charlie waited down at the bottom of the hill because it was kind of a one-person sized tunnel. Yeah. I got up there and I saw where the line was tied off. It was in a real awkward spot to turn around, but there was a little hole in front of me that I thought I could fit through in my rebreather, and so I decided I would just pop into there, and there was another room that I could see that didn't look like it went anywhere, but I thought I could turn around easier there. When I went through there, I saw that there was a second hole in the floor of that room that unlocked the path into the graveyard. We've added about 3,000 feet of line.
It's still good.
Oh, there's still stuff to do back there.
Yeah, there's plenty. Madison is very, it spreads a lot into different passageways, and there's a lot of interconnecting tunnels, and we've seen leads and stuff in the back, and we've yet to go look at them, but that's definitely on the goal list.
Okay.
Yeah, the whole cave splits and then comes back together a lot. You can be in a small tunnel thinking that you're kind of nearing the end, and all of a sudden another tunnel will come back into it, and you're once again in massive cave.
We have people on the KUR roster that are legitimate scientists, biologists, and people that specialize in fossil identification and stuff like that. We've done some fossil identification in Madison, and not so much identification, but documentation. So we've taken videos of it, and that's just stuff that we can show the state. But I don't believe we've done any water studies or anything at Madison at the moment. For me, there's no cave like Virgin Passage. It's so different in its own way, where the rock formations haven't been touched by humans, and there's no fingerprints on the walls, and the girthite is perfectly black and it hasn't been disturbed. And a lot of it is you get to a point where you're questioning where you stopped, and that starts to for me at least anyways, it kind of starts to eat at you like I need to go back and figure out what's next.
Yeah, there aren't many places where you can still go to be the first human to see something or to do something underwater in a cave. There's some opportunities.
And a lot of it too, especially from the Karst Underwater Research perspective of it, is we want to find where these things are going, and we want to show how we can maybe help conserve these natural resources that, you know, are just here. There's so many of them, and a lot of them, you know, they kind of interconnect and do their own thing, and that's something that we strive to look for.
I don't think there's just one finish line. There's years worth of exploration left to do there. Probably still be years of exploration left when it's the next generation's turn. The whole cave system is just so massive that you could never see it all. But on a more serious note, the state parks are governed by these 10-year management plans constructed to say, you know, what they should try to buy or sell or conserve in different ways. There's a bottling plant very close to the head spring at Madison, and the last management plan that had just been built, and they didn't really understand what the effects were going to be on the spring. There's a big call to work with divers to understand where the cave goes and what impacts this could have. If they don't know where the cave goes, they can't properly do permits at the state level. So that next management plan is due very soon, and we are about to publish a new map of Madison, which will be the first new map since the 80s. Shows a lot more cave than what's on that old map. It even has survey of a tunnel that directly intersected one of Nestle's wells.
We're really close. We've got a few major tunnels left that we need to survey.
I would say within the next couple months. It's really difficult because we'll notice or hear about some tunnel and we'll get in the water to go survey it. Of course, it's some tunnel that nobody's been down in recent memory, and we'll get in there and then we'll run into 3 or 4 T's when we're surveying that tunnel, and what was going to be 1 dive turns into 6.
Madison is definitely the gift that just keeps on giving.
Our top priority right now is to finish the map, and by that I don't mean finish surveying every tunnel in Madison, because there are too many. We're aiming to have all of the data that we've already got for the back and everything paired with a pretty complete survey of everything that people could reasonably swim to, make a map that's useful for divers. We're close to having that done. Once that's done, it'll be back to exploration, doing some of the stuff that's farther out, and there's more to find out there. We can publish updates to the map.
My last question for you guys is, where should people go who are interested in learning more about Karst Underwater Research?
The best way would probably be visiting our website, www.karstunderwater.org, and finding us on Facebook. We're pretty responsive on Facebook through Messenger. If you want to get involved, feel free to give us a message, and we'd be happy to have you on for surface support or however you guys want to help.
I can't thank Matt and Eli enough for taking the time to share their experience of exploration in Madison Blue with me. Their work in the cave through Karst Underwater Research will prove invaluable to the conservation efforts by the state. Madison Blue State Park is one of Florida's crown jewels. It has been a vital resource for the local ecosystem and state economy, bringing visitors from around the world year-round. It's been used and enjoyed by humans for centuries. There are still places in this world yet to be discovered, and Madison Blue holds some of these uncharted frontiers within its depths. To keep Madison pristine for generations of explorers to come, we all must help to conserve and protect this natural wonder. By pursuing continued cooperation between state agencies and certified cave divers to further our understanding of the underwater cave system, as well as the aquifer that feeds it, and to further our understanding of the ecological significance it holds for the surrounding areas. Push for policy and legal measures to monitor and limit the impacts of pollution and the reduction of the North Florida aquifer from industrial, agricultural, and commercial activities. And advocate for continued support of the public for conservational organizations. Thanks for joining me on this adventure to Madison Blue. I hope you enjoyed the first installment in the exploration series. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. If you enjoyed this video and want to see another like it, tell me where you'd like our next adventure to be in the comment section below. Until next time, stay adventurous and never stop exploring.